After reading this module, you shall be able to understand the importance of emotions across cultures, understand the universality of some basic emotions, appreciate differences in the cross-cultural differences in understanding of emotions. Introduction. Emotion is a phenomena we all experience, yet very difficult to explain and define to others. For a long time, some psychologists, particularly the behaviorist schools, believed that emotions are irrational and should not be a part of subject matter in psychology. Behaviorists emphasized on overt behavior, and many psychologists made an attempt to study cognitive processes of emotions by observing facial expressions and other overt signs. This text would make an attempt to understand the concept of basic emotions across cultures, thereby developing an understanding on universality of emotional processes. Nonetheless, the paper would appreciate the cultural difference in emotional experiences and their understanding rooted in cultural norms, assumptions, and the corresponding socialization. Matsumoto and Huang in 2001 made an attempt to define emotion as a transient biopsychosocial reaction to events that have consequences for our welfare and potentially require immediate action. The above definition highlights certain features of emotions. Emotions are relatively short-lived when compared to moods. An emotion is often a reaction to an external or internal stimulus. Individuals evaluate situations significant to them as either positive or negative and experience a corresponding emotion. Emotions have often studied as having an adaptive value. It prepares an individual to act in a particular way. Example, fear of an object could make people run away from or avoid the emotion-provoking situation. Often strong emotions block certain mental processes and activate others. Different states of readiness define different action paths of a single situation. Example, fear could freeze people in the situation. An emotion could be thus said to be a mental state accompanied by different bodily responses, actions, and expressions. Emotions play a very significant role in our daily lives at all levels, from the intrapersonal function dealing with us to the interpersonal function of dealing with other individuals, and the social and cultural function of emotions which guides our interaction in groups. The intrapersonal functions of emotion, to elaborate, would include the role that emotions play within each of us individually. Emotions about self help us define our existence. We battle through the mix of different emotions, sometimes even incompatible emotions, in our daily life. Emotions provide understanding of ourself and define our self-concept, starting from self-esteem. The interpersonal functions of emotion, on the other hand, help us acknowledge the function of emotions in determining the quality of relationships with others, and the social and cultural functions of emotion constitute the utility of emotions in maintenance and effective functioning of societies and cultures at large. Some important functions that emotions serve are: emotions motivate us to take actions. Emotions help us survive, thrive, and avoid danger. Emotions can help us make decisions. Emotions allow other people to understand us. Emotions allow us to understand others. All in all, one can now appreciate that emotions contribute significantly to our psychological composition and our understanding of us, other individuals, and societies at large. Concept of basic emotions. Ekman in 1999 gave 3 meanings attached to the term basic with respect to to emotions. Firstly, the concept of basic emotions appreciate that each emotion differs from another, and thus there is a diversity of emotions and its experiences. This is in contrast to the view that believes that all emotional processes are essentially the same. This view suggests that different emotions like sadness, disgust, fear, etc. differ in their appraisal, antecedent event, physiology, and probable behavioral response. Many studies on emotions have suggested that when subjects in experiments are asked to manipulate the facial muscles into distinct facial expressions, example sad, different patterns of physiological and subjective experiences were reported for different facial expressions. This supports that each basic emotion is distinct in its mechanism and experience. The second meaning of basic emotions suggests that the emotions have developed as an adaptive value to different life tasks. This view appreciates that universality of emotions may not just consider the evolutionary approach, but also the fact that certain emotions could be a result of shared social learning irrespective of cultures, as these emotions provided some adaptive value. In short, both evolutionary as well as social constructionist approach could be used to understand and appreciate universality of emotions. Going back to the second view, which considers emotions have an adaptive value to different fundamental life tasks, also share these life tasks, could refer to the problems of survival, like a situation of danger or moving towards a goal. Ekman in 1999 suggested that emotions are designed to deal with interorganismic encounters, which underlines the fundamental life tasks. However, it is also important to reflect here that emotions can also exist when other organisms are not physically present, or in imagination, like one can experience profound joy in and from nature. The third notion attached with basic emotions is that two or more basic emotions could lead to a more complex emotion. For example, smugness is considered to be arising from a mix of two basic emotions, happiness and contempt. Characteristics of basic emotions. All basic emotions can be differentiated from complex emotions and other affective states depending upon certain characteristics like distinct universal signals, emotion-specific physiology, automated appraisal mechanism, etc. Distinct universal signal. The interpersonal function of emotions, which determines the quality of relationships we have, largely depends upon the ability to express emotions, manage and regulate our emotions, and understand others' emotions. We express our emotions through verbal cues like speech and indirectly through various non-verbal cues like facial expressions. In a study by Ross in 1981, it was seen that stroke patients who had difficulty in identifying the prosody that accompanied speech utterances had severe interpersonal difficulties. In his work, Ekman suggests that moods and other emotional traits do not have distinct signals, but these signals are derived from basic emotions. For example, an irritable mood derives its signal from anger emotions. It is found through study across two cultures of Britain and Himba, a small settlement in northern Namibia, by Dr. Daiza Sauter. The participants in this study were made to listen to a short story which was based around a distinct emotion. For example, an individual is very sad because a relative of him had died recently. After the story was finished, the subjects were made to listen two sounds of the participants. For example, one of crying and the other of laughter, and were asked to recognize which sound resembled the emotion being displayed in the story. It was seen that both the groups tend to recognize certain emotions like anger and fear easily, suggesting that few emotions and their expressions are similar across all cultures. The above finding supports many other researches which confirm that the expressions of basic emotions are alike across diverse cultures. It has also been seen that despite a significant difference in human facial musculature, the face muscles that are necessary to produce some emotions are same across individuals. This overall indicates that certain facial muscle structures exist which allows universal expression of few emotions called basic emotions. Research also suggests that there could be instances where an emotion occurs without any visible signal, which could be attributed to our learning to inhibit the expression of emotion as well as a threshold that could be required for expression of emotion. And this could vary across individuals. Also, it is important to reflect here, like emotions could occur without signals, likewise, expression could also occur without experience of emotions. Emotion-specific physiology. Different emotions which serve an adaptive value also share distinct changes in physiology of the experiencing subject. Researchers have shown that distinct patterns of changes in ANS during different emotional states. Renville et al. In 2006 in a study investigated the cardiorespiratory activity during the emotional states such as that of fear, sadness, happiness, etc. They recorded respiratory activity and ECG of 43 healthy volunteers during the recall as well as experiential relieving of either one or two effective emotional autobiographical episodes and of one neutral episode. It was found that the four emotions differed from one another and from the neutral control condition on linear and spectral indices of cardiorespiratory activity, thus suggest that different emotions have a discrete pattern of physiological activity. Other characteristics suggested by Ekman 1990 that basic emotions to an extent might involve an automatic appraisal process and that basic emotions tend to have certain universal antecedent events across cultures. Ekman in 1990 listed some features to differentiate one basic emotion from another and other affective phenomena. Different universal signals, a distinct physiology, automated appraisal, distinct universal causal events, presence in other inmates, quick onset, brief duration, distinctive subjective experience, etc. Universal emotions across cultures. Paul Ekman suggested that emotions are discrete, measurable, and physiologically distinct. Ekman, based upon his research work across cultures, identified few emotions that appear to be recognized across cultures, even in those cultures which were pre-literate and where facial expressions could not have been learned through media. Anger, disgust, fear, happiness, sadness, and surprise were identified as the 6 basic emotions by Ekman. Plutchik further supported Ekman's theory of basic emotions. However, based upon his research, Plutchik extended the 6 basic emotions to 8 primary emotions. Robert Plutchik, in his psychoevolutionary theory of emotions, considered that there are 8 primary emotions. Anger, fear, sadness, disgust suggests that these basic emotions are biologically primitive and have evolved in order to increase the reproductive fitness of animals. Plutchik argued that each of the emotions trigger a response which is assumed to increase survival value. For example, fear inspires the fight or flight response. Plutchik in 1980 suggested 10 postulates in his psycho-evolutionary theory of basic emotions. Some of the key features of the postulates include that the concept of emotions is applicable to all animals, including humans, and have an evolutionary history through which different emotions have evolved, serving an adaptive value. There exist certain prototypical patterns across cultures called primary emotions. These can be understood in terms of paired polar opposites. The emotions exist and vary in level of arousal and intensity. He developed the wheel of emotions, suggesting that the 8 primary emotions can be grouped on a positive or negative basis: joy versus sadness, trust versus distrust, anger versus fear, and surprise versus anticipation. Some primary emotions could be modified to form more complex emotions. According to him, the basic emotions could give rise to complex emotions based upon various cultural conditioning or association. Analogy of 7 primary colors could be used here. Like colors merge, primary emotions could mix to form a vast range of emotional experiences. To quote an example, interpersonal disgust and anger could combine to form contempt. Thus, with different relationships exist between basic emotions, we get diverse range of emotions. Basic emotions versus culture and emotion. We see from above researches that certain emotions are universal irrespective of differences in cultures. These are either innate or cultural constant emotions. However, most emotions fall in the category of cultural emotions, wherein the culture script influences the expression and perception of emotions. In a study on Americans and Japanese culture by Friesen in 1972, it was found that certain cultural differences exist in emotions. The subjects were made to watch films individually, which was followed by watching films with the experimenter. In this study, it was seen that the Japanese subjects smiled more than the Americans when with the experimenter, in contrast to the condition when they were shown individually. The Japanese participants showed more negative expressions. The Japanese seemingly could have done so because the display rule in their culture is to mask their negative emotion in front of a higher power individual, in this case the experiment, whereas the Americans do not have any such cultural rule. On similar lines, other studies have also cited evidence for different meanings of context attributed to differences in cultures. Matsumoto and Cooper-Bush in 2001 indicated that collectivistic societies concocted their negative feelings to a higher status experimenter, while individualistic societies did not, replicating the above findings. Further, it is also seen that additional studies that the participants from collectivistic societies also modify positive feelings, which indicates regulation of emotions as a cultural norm in such societies. This is in consistence with the presence of cultural norm of regulation of behavior and emotions to maintain social harmony in collectivistic societies. Thus, one can conclude from above studies and many other studies that emotional expressions are both universal and culture specific to some extent. One can say that the initial and immediate emotional responses are universal and occur first because the neural connections are less developed, and cultural scripts of emotions occur afterwards. Differences in emotional practices. Cultures differ in 4 aspects of emotions: antecedent events, subjective feeling, appraisal, and expression or behavior. Differences in antecedent events. Cultures promote events that produce culturally desirable emotions and suppress conditions that produce less desirable emotions. To quote, an Eastern culture emphasizes on suppression of negative emotions of anger, whereas Western culture promotes happiness and other positive emotions. The Americans encourage and praise each other, give rewards, and avoid being critical of others to promote a positive view about others and themselves. Differences in experience. Valence. An important dimension of subjective experience is that of valence, pleasure and displeasure. Often cultures differ in their preferred state, with individualistic cultures having more focus on experience of positive emotions in contrast to collectivistic cultures focusing on regulating negative emotions for group harmony. Collectivistic cultures, however, are more or less of receptive to both categories of emotions. Differences in appraisal. As suggested in the beginning, emotions are result of appraisal of the situations by the individual. The appraisals and evaluations are rooted in cultural models. These cultural models can influence the way individual appraises an event as desirable and valuable, or less likable and less valuable, which will in turn govern the distinct pattern of emotional experience. For example, different cultural scripts influence the type of attribution one makes, external or internal, in response to a situation. This is likely to be a contributory cultural influence in emotional experience. Differences in expression and behavior. Cultural models will also influence the frequency of certain expressions and responses to the emotion-provoking situation. If the expression is culturally sanctioned, it is going to be displayed with higher rate of occurrence, whereas others are going to remain more dormant. For example, in Indian culture, shouting back at elders is not appropriate and hence is often suppressed than displayed. Summary. Emotions serve important utility functions in maintaining interpersonal, intrapersonal, and social relationships. Basic emotions are universal emotions across cultures that can be explained through both evolutionary and social constructionist approach. Different basic emotions blend together to form complex emotions. Ekman gave 6 basic emotions, whereas Plutchik in his psychoevolutionary approach gave 8 primary emotions. Facial expressions, physiology, vocal utterances, automatic appraisal, etc. are certain characteristics that help us to differentiate basic emotions from each other and other affective states. Studies support both universality and culture-specific emotions, and it is seen that initial emotional expression is universal, whereas subsequent emotional expression is culturally influenced. There are cultural differences in 4 aspects of emotions: antecedent events, subjective feeling, appraisal, and expression or behavior.